Hey there, welcome back to the Future of Work podcast. Today we're tackling something a whole lot of us know all too well: imposter syndrome. Nearly 7 out of 10 people feel this way, and it affects high achievers at every level. So if you've been there, you're definitely not alone. It's that nagging voice in the back of your mind saying, "Who do you think you are?" even when you've clearly earned your stripes. To dive into this, we got Dr. Valerie Young with us today, and she's the real deal. Since 1982, she's been an internationally recognized expert on imposter syndrome, co-founder of the Impostor Syndrome Institute, and the brains behind the Rethinking Imposter Syndrome program. She's delivered it to places like NASA, Google, and even the NBA, helping leaders and teams rewrite their inner narratives. If that's not enough, her award-winning book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, has been helping capable people thrive in 6 languages. So, what does it mean to reframe your thoughts and have an imposter moment instead of an imposter life? Dr. Valerie Young, welcome. So excited to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, Daniel.
This is really a conversation that I've been awaiting to have with you because I must confess to all our listeners and to you, so you know, I constantly feel like an imposter day to day. Why am I here? How did I get here? Am I worth it? So, to start, can you give us an understanding, first of all, of what imposter syndrome is and why it affects so many people? As you say, 7 out of 10. That's a lot. What is it about this feeling that resonates so much with so many people?
Yeah, that's a great question, Daniel. It's actually the more recent number that's coming out of academic research is more like 82%.
Oh wow, okay.
But also keep in mind that people are on kind of a spectrum, a range of how intense these feelings are. It could be kind of low, moderate or very intense feelings of imposterism. So essentially, what it means is that deep down, despite evidence, often overwhelming evidence to the contrary, we feel like we're really not as intelligent, capable, competent, talented, qualified as other people seem to think that we are. And as a result of that, we're going to be left with this fear of being found out. And let me just say what's kind of so fascinating about imposter syndrome, Daniel, is that, again, we have these beliefs despite concrete evidence of our accomplishments or our abilities. But the other kind of hallmark of imposterism is that people discard, dismiss, diminish their achievements by chalking them up to largely factors outside of themselves, things like luck, timing, personality, this idea that they just like me, connections, or if I can do it, how hard can it be?
And maybe even sometimes comparing themselves to others, right? That could be also something. That constant comparison. Would you also say that imposter syndrome is sort of similar to, is it like similar to low self-esteem, or are these completely different things?
The research does suggest that I think, especially for people with intense feelings, there can be a connection with low self-esteem. Psychologists often put the two together. I had a conversation recently with Dr. Kevin Coakley at University of Michigan, and I said, "So, Kevin, if we're saying 82% of people experience imposter syndrome, are we really saying that 82% of people have low self-esteem?" And he's like, "Wow, I hadn't really thought of it like that." So it might be people more on, again, that with those intense feelings. I think of self-esteem as this kind of global sense we have about ourselves, but imposter feelings are very specific to achievement arenas: work, school, business, career. You don't feel like an imposter when you're walking the dog or, emptying the dishwasher.
Yeah, for sure. And like, how did you encounter imposter syndrome? Was there like a pivotal moment in your career where you said, "I have to dedicate myself to this"? And maybe the question in it of itself is, did you feel like this and therefore start tackling to help others and yourself?
Yeah, it was more the latter. I did not set out as any intentional, career path. I was a doctoral student in the School of Education at the University of Massachusetts. Somebody brought in a paper by Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes. Those are the two clinical psychologists who coined the term the imposter phenomena, which is, the original phrasing. And started describing how they thought it was women at the time, right? So describing how all these bright, capable, competent women thought they were fooling folks, they were going to be found out. And I just instantly identified. So, being an educator, my instinct was I actually changed my dissertation topic and looked more broadly at kind of women's self limiting attitudes and behaviors. So, but just because of my training, I'm not a therapist, so I wasn't looking for clinical interventions, therapy. I immediately created what I now know is the first educational intervention for imposter syndrome, which is a really fancy way of saying I created a workshop to use education as a way to help people to unlearn imposter syndrome.
Awesome. That's congratulations on that. I think the work that you're doing is very helpful to those of us who feel this way. And I really like something that you say in your TED Talk, which we'll include in our episode. You can't talk your way out of imposter syndrome, but it's a start, and that's the objective here, to talk about it first. And what makes it so hard to just over what makes it so hard to overcome acknowledging it? Like, why does simply talking about imposter syndrome only take us so far?
Yeah, I think it's like anything. I often joke, Daniel, that my friends and I sometimes sit around and talk about how fat we feel, but we never feel any thinner, at the end of that conversation. Researchers find that adolescents who they call it co ruminating, in other words, adolescents who dwell on negative thoughts and feelings with their friends, actually experienced higher levels of anxiety and depression. So, if you're just ruminating about something, but you're not taking any action to address it, you're just going to kind of spiral and nothing's really going to change. So it's good to have the conversation, to bring it out of the shadows, to normalize it, especially in organizations. But you can't just stop there.
That makes total sense. And a little bit ago, you mentioned this refers to your book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. Are certain people more prone to experiencing imposter syndrome? Do you believe it's more prone for females, women to experience this in comparison to their male counterparts? Is there any data behind that, or any specific personality types? You're just mentioning right now people that ruminate. So
Yeah.
maybe people with OCD, maybe. Like, are there specific types of people where this syndrome, imposter syndrome, attacks them a little bit more, if you will?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I actually just Random House let me update the book. So a new version came out last year, and we actually changed the title to The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women and Men. Um,
Okay.
I never liked the title, honestly. I fought against it, but everybody loved it. So like, what do I know? Is my first book, so I went along with it. But I'm not crazy about the title because a lot of people don't resonate. They think as quote unquote successful woman, she's a CEO or she's a head of a country or somebody very high level, as opposed to first year college student or an artist or a small business owner, or whoever, a podcaster, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Experience
Yeah.
imposter feelings. So I don't like the title. I do think women as a group and more recent research is showing that. For a long time, you would hear people say that the research is showing that it's even, but some new research came out that really looked at 300 articles or papers, empirical research, and found it does skew more towards women, I think, for a lot of societal reasons as well. But certain people, I think there's situational factors. Students as a segment of the population, college students, especially graduate students, medical students, much more likely to have imposter feelings. There's some suggestion that people who work alone are more susceptible. People in certain fields, STEM fields, rapidly changing information dense fields like STEM, where you feel like you should be able to keep up on everything when no human possibly could. People in creative fields, people in very highly competitive fields like law firms, big law firms, and management consulting companies, things like that. And then, there's family messages that can play into it. And then there's
Yeah.
what I see as kind of and societal factors. You can't
Yeah.
discount the pressure to have to represent your entire group. If you're the only person who has a disability, on your team, you feel like you have to like super disabled person or whatever that group might be.
Yeah, and something you just said really resonated with me. You say that people who work alone tend to experience this more. And right now, in the era of remote work, I'll just give my example. I work from home most of the time. We're hybrid, but I choose to work from home. And I think these imposter feelings or this ruminating does happen more when I'm by myself at home, working with myself, and the cat's there, and I talk to him every once in a while, right? But then I go into the office and just interacting with other people who feel maybe the same and we talk about it, those feelings sort of like go away. That's one of the benefits I see of going into the office, if you will. There are other people that are going through the same things you are. You just forget when you're home alone.
Right, right. Yeah, and when you're working alone, whether it's as a solo practitioner or solopreneur, or you're working remotely, I think it's a lot easier to get in your head. You don't necessarily have somebody there to bounce ideas off of, or get perspective, or get feedback. As you said, you can do that much more when you're actually in the office. And again, for people who aren't employees but they're self-employed, they're giving themselves their own performance evaluation, and because we're
Yeah.
so hard on ourselves, we're always coming up short.
Yeah. And I really, really enjoyed your tech talk. You're quite funny in it, and I really appreciate that. One of the most powerful takeaways from your TED talk is that people who don't feel like imposters aren't necessarily more capable. They just think differently. They just think differently than us imposters. Could you elaborate on what that means? Is it all about thought patterns?
It's about how we look at some very specific things in the TED talk, which was maybe 7 years ago, I want to
Yeah.
say, or 5 years ago. And it was definitely just before the pandemic. But in the TED talk, I referred to that other group as being quote unquote non-imposters, right?
Hmm.
I don't use that language anymore. Let's just go back to that 70-30. Let's just say 70-30, right?
Hmm.
My question is like, what's up with the other 30? Like, why aren't we studying them, right? Some part of that 30 is that kind of narcissistic, proverbial smartest guy in the room, arrogant, or they think they know more than they know, irrational self-confidence syndrome, right? We don't want to be them, but there's a minority within that minority who we do want to learn from, people who are genuinely humble, but have just said to me, I've never had these feelings. And it's not that they're, again, more intelligent, capable, competent. It's that they think different thoughts, but in very specific ways. I call these people humble realists. They have a realistic understanding of competence to include their limitations, not just their strengths. They have a healthy response to failure, mistakes, constructive feedback, and they understand that a certain amount of fear and self doubt is just part of the achievement journey.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing, as we just mentioned, this leaders would be most prone to encountering imposter syndrome because of the position of power, or because they need to succeed with their team and make their team succeed. How does imposter syndrome manifest specifically among high performing individuals and leaders? Does this mindset impact their confidence, decision making, and how they approach management? And therefore, does this impact a business as a whole, having leaders that don't feel like they're leaders?
Right. Yeah, there's definitely organizational costs. Honestly, whether the actual leader experienced imposter syndrome or not, it would still be costs when employees do. There was an interesting study with Israeli executives, half men and half women, and it was looking at their reasons for seeking executive coaching,
Okay.
leadership coaching. And their stated reason was to become better leaders. Once they got into coaching, what was discovered, it was two things universally: was it's lonely at the top.
Mm-hmm.
If it's all coming down to your decision, I mean, that's a lot of pressure. And imposter syndrome was the other two things. Corn Ferry just came out with a new survey that they did, and in the U.S., 71% of U.S. CEOs experienced imposter feelings. I think it was 65% of other senior executives, and it was slightly higher in India. They did a global study. So it's definitely something that you're going to find at the leadership level. You also find a lot of narcissists at the leadership level. There's some good books written on that as well. But I think for most people, it's going to be really common. See, because people think, well, the more successful I become, then I'll be more confident and I won't feel like an imposter. And often the opposite happens, right? You
Yeah.
just feel like you're fooling more people on a higher level.
Yeah. Oh, I can totally relate to that, and I know a lot of people will. Um, what would you say are some of the most common mistakes people make when they try to deal with these feelings of self doubt? What are those most common mistakes you would say?
Well, one is just thinking that they're the only ones who feel this way and kind of looking around the room and making this assumption that everybody else is confident and knows what they're doing when they might be struggling with the exact same thing. Another thing, and we've really looked at like what are other folks out there who are doing training or delivering talks or workshops on imposter syndrome or coaching, telling their clients or their audiences, and often I call it the pep talk approach.
Okay.
So it's like, you got it and you can do it and you deserve to be here, right? Or like telling people to make a list of their accomplishments to
Mm-hmm.
remind them, of how fabulous they are. Well, I don't think Tom Hanks forgot that he won an Oscar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, and then, but what happens when you look down that list and you realize that, guess what? Maybe you did have an amazing connection. Maybe you were in the right place at the right time. People dismiss personality as like, oh, they just said I did a great job just because they like me, as if likability wasn't a valid skill set, especially in leadership. It really is. And again, it goes back to, I think, yes, recognize our strengths and gifts and talents, but I'm a big fan of really having a healthy relationship with our limitations. And if I could just share this quickly, Google has this program called I Am Remarkable. Anybody can go out there right now and become an I Am Remarkable workshop facilitator. It's like maybe a 2-hour virtual workshop or in person. And they created it because they found their employees, especially women, especially internationally, were having a hard time talking about their achievements in a performance environment for societal reasons, for cultural reasons. So they created this program to talk about, it's not bragging if it's true, and, get women especially more comfortable talking about their accomplishments. But the key piece of it is towards the end, everyone pauses, you take 5 minutes, you write down your accomplishments, and then everybody goes around the room and says, I'm remarkable because, and you share one of the examples. My feedback to Google, I've worked with Google in the US, I've worked with Google in Europe. My feedback is they need to change the name to I'm remarkable and some days I suck.
Okay.
Because we're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
always going to be remarkable, right? We're going to
Yeah.
have good days and off days, and that's okay. That's having
It's
a
okay to not
really
be brilliant at everything. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. I had a client. I don't do a lot of coaching. We train coaches to be imposter syndrome informed, but I don't actually do a lot of coaching.
Okay.
This guy was a very senior executive, big picture strategy guy. They were bringing in all these younger people with their MBAs and their standard operating procedures and their spreadsheets, and his head was like exploding because he's a big picture guy. And they were like getting to be around the $100 million mark for this company. It was explosive growth, and he experienced imposter syndrome. So, but he also knows he's a star. There's always that like flip side. Like on the one hand, we think we're kind of a hot dog, so he knows he's a star in the company. And I said, so John, it sounds like you're expecting yourself to be the star pitcher, the star batter, the star catcher, the star base runner, the star outfielder. And he looked at me and he said, oh my God, I'm a sports guy. I just got it. We can't excel at everything simultaneously, and neither can anyone else.
That's yeah. It's accepting our limitations, like you say, and talking now, like from the feeling to actually the action plan, if you will. Something you said in your tech talk, which I really started thinking about, is you don't have to feel confident to act confident, and that really got me thinking. Um, how how does this distinction between feeling and action gradually help people overcome imposter syndrome? Is it Do we have to put a mask on and fool ourselves in order to not fool ourselves and others? Like that really got me thinking, and I've been waiting for
Yeah,
this moment to ask because
yeah, that's such a legitimate question because people might be thinking, well, wait a minute, I already feel like a big phony, and you want me to pretend even more. But it
yeah,
kind of goes back to your question, Daniel, about organizational costs.
yeah,
If you've got people who are full, have the capacity, have the potential, right, to advance, but in their mind they feel like they're not ready. Like, oh well, I'll apply for that promotion or I'll take on these more challenging assignments or opportunity when I feel more capable or I feel more confident. It could be a really long time, right? Very often, like if you've never done something, you're not going to feel 100% confident. You're going to be kind of off base, right? You've got to jump in. It's the same thing with starting a new position, especially at a brand new company. I tell people, like, give yourself permission to feel off base for a month, 2 months, 3 months. You're meeting all these new names, new systems, new acronyms, inside jokes, right? On top of your job. You're going to be like a deer in the headlights, and that's normal. It's not an indication that you're not ready, but you got to kind of feel that, allow the anxiety. It's going to be real, and just kind of jump in because your body doesn't know the difference between fear and excitement anyway.
Yeah. And I think that does happen a lot of times when people are starting new positions or new careers. They put so much pressure on themselves to be the best that first day. And we just got to allow ourselves to make mistakes. Something our CEO, Frank Cottle, always tells us is it's okay to make mistakes. What's the worst thing that could happen? We fix them. We fix them as
Right,
a team. We learn from them, and
right.
that goes back to the whole corporate scenario.
Mhm.
I agree with you. I believe that corporations need to not only start talking about this with their employees, with their organizations, with their leaders, but they need to make it what it is, something normal, something that
Right.
8 out of 10 now you say are dealing with. We need to normalize it. We definitely need to normalize this. Do you have any examples on how small actions or changes in behaviors can lead to someone to start feeling more confident? From
Sure.
what we just talked about, the you don't have to feel confident to act confident. In my own words, I would put it, tell me if you don't agree. um, Fake it till you make it. You've probably already made it, but fake it.
Right. Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have a, gut visceral negative response to that phrasing. I have a whole chapter on, all the reasons why that puts off a lot of people, especially women, because they kind of equate it with like a used car salesman, or that kind of thing. They feel like it's lying. And but there was this woman years ago, and she was asked at the 11th hour to step in for a VP and make this big pitch to clients, right? So she kind of whipped it off the last minute. Everyone said she nailed it, but she said, "Oh man, that was just a bunch of BS I threw together at the last minute." And I said, "No, the reframe there is, wow, how good am I that I can pull together information at the last minute that other people genuinely found helpful." Because when you think about it, Daniel, what we're really saying is other people are so stupid,
Yeah,
they don't realize we're incompetent. Right? And that's kind of arrogant and kind of absurd, right? If you said to me, "Oh, it's a great podcast, Valerie," and I'm like, "Oh, really, Daniel? Seriously? I mean, how many podcasts have you done before? Really? You thought that was good?" It would be pretty arrogant of me.
yeah. And sort of to begin concluding our episode, which I believe has been so insightful. I loved it when you spoke about having an imposter moment
Mhm.
rather than an imposter life. Could you explain a little what you mean by this concept and how it helps people manage these feelings in a healthier way?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what people want is to stop feeling like an imposter, right? They want to hear a presentation, listen to a podcast, read a book, starting out with feeling like an imposter, and at the end, not feel like an imposter, right? And that's not how it works. That feelings are the last to change. So, I mean, my mantra is that the only way to stop feeling like an imposter is to stop thinking like an imposter. And we do that we unlearn imposter syndrome by learning how to adopt the mindset again of a humble realist. And I know we're focusing a lot on individuals and leaders, but I want to say that there's such an organizational impact to imposter syndrome. It impacts productivity, especially if you're a perfectionist, or if you are chronically procrastinating as a way to cope with imposter feelings.
Uh-oh.
Well, and I also don't want to, like, we all procrastinate, right? We're
Yes.
hardwired to avoid things that are big, hard, difficult, not very fun. But when it becomes a problem is when it can undermine, achieving your major job objectives and so on. But the research shows people with imposter feelings have less job satisfaction. So there's a retention issue. It impacts advancement because talented people with huge potential aren't stepping up. It impacts innovation because people have great ideas or great questions, but they're not sharing them because, let's face it, we don't want to like look stupid in front of other people. And it affects our health and wellness. There's a high level of burnout for people who use overworking, over preparing as a coping mechanism for imposter syndrome.
Wow. And so, for those of you listening to us today, know that from listening to this episode, you probably won't stop feeling like an imposter today, but at least you'll have more insights um, from Dr. Valerie Young. What would you say, Dr. Valerie, as a closing statement, if you will, to those listening out there today? What are the main takeaways you would say they should leave with from our conversation so that they can start turning feelings into action as of right now after listening to this episode? Because I believe that if we live in a world where everyone feels like an imposter. And back then it was 7 out of 10. And right now it's 8 out of 10. And the tendency continues and everyone feels like an imposter. What does that mean for the future of work? Are we all just going to be self doubting ourselves? Are we all just going to be procrastinating? Like, what does
Right.
this mean?
Yeah, there's absolute, bottom line costs. So, I mean, I think fundamentally what I want to leave people with is that the solution is to become imposter syndrome informed. If you have an internal coaching program, or even if it's informal coaching or mentoring, are those people imposter syndrome informed? Can you normalize imposter feelings, the syndrome, and help educate people about it in new, onboarding with new employee orientation, management training. There's so many things that could be kind of built into organizations that can address it, and also just on the cultural level, to your point, right? Sometimes organizations themselves can kind of fuel self-doubt.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And again, I think we all have to work on acknowledging our imposter moments and not thinking we have an imposter life. Dr. Valerie Young, thank you so much for being with us today. Um, I really hope to speak to you soon again. And thank you so much for bringing all your insights and your expertise. We will definitely link your book and the TED Talk within our episode so people can get even an, an additional layer of information to start tackling this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If it's impacting the future of work, it's in the Future of Work podcast by allwork.space.